So just in practical terms, Tim, a patient who comes into your general practice with, he's had a coronary event, he's had an angiogram, or she's had an angiogram with a coronary stent placed, has gone on to a statin, aspirin, and other medications. How do you go about, in Ayurvedic terms, though the Ayurvedic approach is different for each patient, in broad principles, how do you go about integrating Ayurvedic medicine with what the patient has already been started on with conventional medicine? And can the two coexist happily?
Yes, there's no problem in Ayurveda coexisting with modern medicine. In fact, I see that modern medicine is a part of Ayurveda rather than the other way around. Ayurveda actually forms a framework for integrating all pathies into one complete science. So it's all there. And if I have such a patient with coronary artery disease, then I'd do it the usual way, but always have my hand on the pulse first to get to know who I'm dealing with, who is this patient, and where his particular imbalance, what mode it's taken, whether it's in the Vata mode, the Pitta or the Kapha mode. And at first I would advise a mental bath morning and evening to transcend all thought and concerns of the day and just be. And as Craig pointed out, there's some very good research now that this can turn around heart disease. It's very interesting that the mind, the heart seems to be very susceptible to meditation, to the mind quietening, more than any other organ. There's this very close connection between the heart and the mind. And studies that have come out through the Maharishi University of Management and National Institutes of Health, which have funded a number of these studies, have shown that people with coronary artery disease who practice transcendental meditation have 47% reduction in deaths, heart attacks and strokes when followed over a 5-year period. So this is without any change in diet or lifestyle, just with meditation. 48% reduction in heart attacks, strokes and deaths. When you consider a statin can give about a 30% reduction, that's pretty good. And this is on top of the statins. They're already taking their statins and antihypertensives. So the mind is very powerful, and I think it points to the problem in our Western world is that we are very disconnected from ourselves, from our emotions, and the importance of reconnecting. So number one would be the mental bath twice a day, and then I generally, with people with chronic disease, there's a lot of ama. Ama means undigested, unmetabolized waste. The body hasn't completely processed, digested and metabolized, and this is like a sludge that gets into the tissues, interferes with the cells functioning, and is at the basis of most health problems. It's what further disconnects us from ourselves. So they need to do some cleansing. They need to go on a light diet. They need to take spices and herbs that help the process of cleansing. And there's a very elaborate system of cleansing known as panchakarma in Ayurveda, where you go to a hospital or a residential facility and go through a sequence of processes: massage, internal cleansing, very, very pleasant oil therapies, and herbal therapies to bring about this removal of these toxins. And after that, then we can be more effective in our diet and everything else. Just a couple of points about diet. Digestion, as I pointed to, is very important. It's not just what we eat, it's how we process the food. And how we process the food very much depends on what's happening here. Are we connected with what our body's telling us? Are we hungry at the time? If we're not hungry, then we don't eat. It's very simple. And we should just eat to the point we're comfortable. If we overdo it, then we create ama. Very important that all senses are satisfied when we eat. So the senses are involved in preparing the body for the digestive process. So the meal time should be settled. We should be eating in such a way that our body is ready for the food. It's hungry. It's not still digesting the donut we have for breakfast or whatever. So make sure we digest the food well. We're in the right state of mind. We're tuned into what our body's telling us. And in terms of the types of foods we should be eating, if we're more Vata type, then cholesterol-lowering diet is actually counterproductive. It's going to make your Vata worse. It's going to make you more anxious. It's going to create more blood pressure. So it's important that we know who we're dealing with. The Vata type needs to have the omega-3s. They need to have some saturated fat, monosaturated fats in their diet. A kapha person, sure, we focus on cholesterol lowering. And we'd also focus on exercise for kapha. Kapha tends to be more sedentary, tend to put on weight. So they need to be motivated to do more vigorous exercise. Pitta types are more prone to inflammation, another aspect of coronary artery disease. So if Pitta is strong, then they need to be careful with too much salt, too much alcohol, hot spices, that sort of thing. So the diet needs to be tailored according to the individual. And then the same with the lifestyle. So a Vata type, we wouldn't recommend doing marathon runs or going to the gym and doing heavy weights. Some yoga or walking, swimming, that type of thing, that's not going to push the body too much for the Vata is important. Kapha types, as I mentioned, need to be more vigorous in their lifestyle and their exercise. So then after that we'd look at the herbs. So the herbs are not the be-all and end-all, but if we prepare the mind and body, make sure that the body is clear of this toxicity, where the body is being fed the nourishing foods that are going to restore the memory of balance. Food should be organic, should be free of toxins, not genetically modified, should be prepared fresh. All these are very important to ensure the full intelligence is there in the food. The synergy of all the active principles is there to wake up the body's intelligence. So very, very easily we can help prevent these problems from recurring.
Now we can continue talking for a long time, but I'd like to open it up to question time. So I think I've got one here at the front.
Yeah. Hi, Tim. This question. Hi, Tim. This question's to you. Do people's types change from over time? So if someone's Pitta or Vata, do they change? Does their constitution change?
Yes, that's a good question. So we're all born with a certain type. It's determined by what our mother was doing when we were in the womb, what food she was eating, by the constellation at the time of birth. So all these things together, and our genes have some part to play in it. So it all comes together in determining whether we're Vata, Pitta, Kapha, or some combination. Usually we're a combination of 2 or 3. And then if we're brought up in a certain environment and fed a certain diet, then that can also have an influence on our doshic makeup. So that becomes a different type of body type. It's called the Daya body type, Daya Prakriti. And then if we're getting into imbalanced ways, we're becoming stressed and becoming anxious or too depressed or too intense on things, and that will also have an effect on our doshic makeup. In fact, that's the most important one to know. So through the pulse, we're able to primarily pick up what's happening now, we call it vikriti, what the current imbalance is, and that's determined by what foods and things we're doing with ourselves at that time, as well as what's happening in the mind. So the most important thing is to know where we're at now, and then on that basis we can then identify the foods, activities, and cognitive approaches we need to bring it into balance.
A question behind you, Craig.
It is very interesting to see, the observations from the experts in different fields. Thank you very much for that. But being a cultural Indian, there is no interesting things unless you are provocative. See, in India, they don't do yoga. They don't read Vedanta. They don't analyze their health. They live their life as it comes and then take it as a fate. And how do they manage? See, what I am trying to think is, it all has to be in the culture, not in the teaching or individual doing. What do you think of that?
Thank you for the question. I'm going to hand it over to Gautam because he's obviously far more credential than I have, you can clearly see. But what I have noticed in many trips to India and discussing with leading lights such as Dr. Ananda, Shelley Tellis, and well-known people who study this, we've got to be careful not to make an assumption that the Indian culture is all one culture. India is blessed with one of the highest increasing rates of diabetes and heart disease in the world. So it's not actually getting very good scores for the people who are not practicing these things we're talking about. There is a re-emergence, albeit a slow one, of the ancient traditions coming back in India. That's my take on it, but we'll see what Gautam says.
Your fundamental question is then, why is it in India that appears to be greater health? Is that it?
No, I don't mean that. What I am trying to say is, they take it as it comes. They are not anxious, they are not fearful, they are not, in a way, trying to fix the problem.
It's a large generalized statement. I don't know if I can substantiate that, to be honest. I don't know if I can necessarily substantiate that comment. Of course, culture and lifestyle are connected. I think one thing is that our individual lifestyle, to maintain an individual lifestyle, it is much easier when the people around us are also following that. So when people around us also follow a common behavioral pattern, then we can call that a culture, so to speak. Yeah, a person may have an individual lifestyle, but it becomes more difficult to implement and execute healthy living techniques if the people around you are very unhealthy. So certainly in an area where everyone is following a healthier lifestyle, or you have a healthier culture, then it becomes easier for the individual to also follow that. Now, whether that's happening in India or not, I can't necessarily, like I said, substantiate that, because I think the research is showing that there is a lot of ill health there as well. So that's about all I can say. I think the statement is possibly too general.
Additionally, we can either take it as it comes, or we can prevent it before it comes. So I think we're looking at implementing these kinds of sciences to prevent it before it comes. And if it happens, then we take it as it comes and take the necessary action. Question?
First of all, thank you to the panelists. It's been a good evening. I have a question. We've got 4 different areas we've discussed, but how would the term the self be defined in the different areas? Because I know some people say, okay, mindfulness is the self. Some people, if they've studied Samkhya, they say the consciousness is the self, or the observer, or the witness, or the Sakshi. Many different terms. Could we have a view from the different areas? If you're digging down deeper,
yes,
what is it that knows that it knows? That's one question.
It's a very deep question. I think the urologist is not the person qualified to answer that question. So I'm going to go straight to Gautamji.
So the self in Vedanta is called Atma. And this Atma, in its essential property, essential nature, I should say, not property, is considered to be Sat, Chit, Ananda, having 3 nature. Swarupa is the word in Sanskrit, but it means, we can say, essential nature, that from which it does not deviate. So one is Sat, pure existence, Chit is pure consciousness, and Ananda is pure bliss. Sat refers to the undeviated awareness or notion that I am. I am. At no point in time does a person ever feel I am not. A person can only recognize that I am. So that sort of brings out the Sat aspect of it. Chit is the aspect I know I am. I am aware. I have self-awareness. I am aware of my own existence. We would say that a table, a chair, does not have this chit or chaitanya aspect of self-awareness. I'm sure if the chair knew it was aware, it would try to avoid me sitting on it. So it would just run. Yeah? So, self-awareness is called chaitanya or chit. And the last one is ananda. Ananda is a state of deep, fulfilling peace which transcends even the mind. Of course, now that seems to be largely obscured by our mental, conscious and subconscious processes, which seem to be almost blankets on top of actually the essential nature, which is ananda. And that's why through the processes of meditation, quietening the mind, what we are trying to do is actually remove that blanket of the conscious thought processes to discover the self as it is. And that's why one does feel greater peace when one can slow down the mental processes. So from a Vedantic point of view, the self is considered to be Sat, Chit, Ananda, and it is different from all other aspects of body, mind and intellect. That's how Vedanta would look at it. I'm going to handle it over.
This, of course, is a very deep topic, which is beyond the scope of a 1.5 hour seminar, and is probably more the scope of a lifetime and many lifetimes. So I'm going to keep going with more questions. We've got another 10 minutes to go.
Thank you for such wonderful information and contribution. My question is about mental health issues which are a little bit above depression and anxiety. Of course, there are different extremes within those experiences, but things like schizophrenia, personality disorders and things like that, which although that they will respond to lifestyle changes and things, that there seems to be I'm not quite sure what the right terminology would be, but there's an element which is perhaps more stubborn, for want of a better word, doesn't respond so well to things like counselling or meditation and lifestyle changes and things like that. I'd be very interested in anyone's input.
I'll just briefly start that and say that a prudent yoga teacher and yoga therapist who is sticking by their code of professional practice will always work in conjunction with a multidisciplinary team if they are to be involved with somebody with what you're calling a high level mental illness, and that little steps, rather than trying to... We're not looking for revolution, we're looking for evolution sometimes with the yoga practice. So that's how we would approach that.
From a meditation perspective, if somebody had a disposition towards psychosis, and that could include schizophrenia or bipolar disorder, for example, that would be a relative contraindication, or at least a caution for meditation practice, especially intensive meditation practice. A 10-day silent retreat, just you and your mind on the cushion, may not be a really good idea. There are isolated examples of triggering psychotic episodes with intensive practice for somebody who's not both experienced and appropriate for that. For a person in an acute psychotic episode, meditation, again, sitting contemplative practice like that, may not be a good idea either. But activity that engages the attention, that brings the person to the present moment, something that's moving or more active, that engages the attention and unhooks the attention from a very chaotic state of mind, could be a very useful thing to do. There is some research on, say, things like mindfulness for a person who's had a past history of psychosis in a stable phase of the condition, not doing intensive practice but learning to live with more attention and awareness and presence, who has enough insight to be able to start to stand back from the thoughts and to start to not get so drawn into them. That the research tends to show that it doesn't make the condition go away. It improves the resilience and ability to manage stress, which is sometimes a trigger for new episodes. But secondly, it helps to reduce the intrusiveness of residual symptoms. And did you see the movie A Beautiful Mind? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Now, I think that's actually what he was intuitively practicing, that the residual symptoms were still there. It wasn't like, going away. but they were intruding less and less upon him and his ability to function. And I think that meditation can be used in a discerning way with a very well-trained mental health professional who's very experienced in meditation, can cautiously, with the appropriate motivated person, use that as an adjunctive treatment, and moving just cautiously in conjunction with medications that may be appropriate for that particular condition as well. So very much a joint approach, I think, is needed. But it is an area for caution with meditation. Proceed with caution.
So time for one last question.
Thank you very much. It was a really interesting talk. I just wanted to know whether there was any research on the role of these treatments in dementia. And we're hearing a lot in the news about early Alzheimer's, early dementia. It's a big problem in the Western world. And I just wondered whether there was integrative therapies that were research-based.
Maybe I can just start by saying we're very keen to get research going. I've been trying for the last 2 years to get some research in Australia, but you need, in order to do so, to get the funding, you need to have a pilot study, and the pilot study needs funding also. So we're in a bit of a catch-22 situation. So if anyone has any ideas on how we can get research going here, I'd be very interested to hear, because I'm sure, particularly with meditation, that we can do a lot to prevent cognitive decline that happens in some of us. As I mentioned, health is a natural phenomenon. To dement isn't what we're born to be here for. There's something obviously fundamentally wrong that we're doing with our lives, or that we're being exposed to in our environment, that's causing this epidemic. So I'm sure the whole approach of Ayurveda, meditation, has a lot to offer. There's already some research on the Ayurvedic herbs, particularly Withania somnifera, which is actually shown to enhance neurogenesis. We've heard from Craig about how meditation can actually help the brain to develop, synapses to form. With transcendental meditation, the research shows that the whole brain starts to become more connected. The prefrontal cortex here, which is what makes us human, what enables us to think and be able to see consequences of our actions, starts to come online. The alpha rhythm here is seen throughout the whole brain. The neural imaging shows that the cortex starts to light up throughout the whole brain. So something's happening there that's contrary, quite the opposite to what happens in people with dementia. There's this build-up of rubbish in the cell, these plaques. It's all this rubbish that the body hasn't been able to deal with. So proper detoxification, purification, I'm sure, will do a lot to prevent these sorts of problems.
From the risk factors for dementia are the same as the risk factors for heart disease, for cancer, for all the chronic illnesses, which means that the treatment for it is the same as well. If you want to look at a total approach, the Ornish approach, because omega-3s, plant-based diet, low saturated fat, all of these things have been shown to reduce the risk of dementia. From a mind, body and meditation perspective, there's very good research to show that if there's something called default mode. Default mode's the distracted state of mind. When we're not paying attention, we go into default mode, worrying, negative self-talk, reliving past things, So default mode's the mode of mind when we're distracted. And research shows the more time a person spends in default mode, the more the brain gets gummed up with amyloid and all of the proteins that predispose to dementia. The less cognitively stimulating things a person has in their life, things that engage attention and interaction, the more likely a person is to get to dementia. The research shows that when a person practices paying attention and being present, so as in meditation, it stimulates new neuronal growth in the hippocampus, which is the memory centre of the brain, the prefrontal cortex. It literally thickens up the grey matter the longer a person's been practicing. Now, that's circumstantial evidence to show that it actually reverses the assumed thinning of the grey matter that happens with ageing. Now, there are a number of trials that have already shown that if a person learns meditation with early cognitive decline, they improve their cognitive functioning. And another recent trial showed as well with yoga practices, again, improve cognitive functioning, improve memory. We are actually doing a trial at the moment on mindfulness for people with early cognitive decline. So there is a trial that's in the early stages at the moment. So yes, there is an evidence base, and the signposts are pointing in a very positive direction. I can point you at some of those references if you're interested.
Thank you very much, Craig. Well, time has slipped away. Would like to thank everyone for joining us at the Australia-India Institute. I'd like to thank Professor Mathu, who unfortunately is in India. He got caught up in the floods in Kashmir, but thankfully he is safe. Thank the Institute for putting on tonight's function. Would like to thank all the panellists, Craig, Tim, Leigh and Gautamji. And we look forward to talking more about integration. I think the common theme that has emerged this evening is the mind and the consciousness is so important in terms of prevention and in patients with the disease. So we all need to meditate. Thank you.